A lot of people jump into entrepreneurship thinking about this outcome in mind.
That 70% of second businesses fail.
I don't think I've heard any podcast that says I made 100 million.
Is that something you can't get anywhere else?
What do you think is missing in the podcasting space right now?
In the face of AI, the only way that you can compete with that is by being unique, differentiated, good.
I feel like people are afraid of putting that information out there.
I'm being really honest with myself. Would I listen to this idea if it wasn't me that made it?
How did you get into podcasts so early?
I figured the next wave was podcasting. Every brand needs a podcast.
I want to build a $1 billion company.
Actually, that you're fooling yourself.
Hey guys, welcome back to Funds and Founders. We have Harry on today. Harry, I have this bit on my podcast where I tell everyone that retention on YouTube is like 2 to 3 minutes. And so I ask everyone to plug themselves when they get on, what you're working on, what you're doing, where can people find you, what should people reach out about, and then we'll get into the episode.
Sure. So you should probably check out Moneywise, which is a podcast I produce. My company produces along with Sam Parr of My First Million fame. And I've started hosting a lot of the episodes of that particular show. Moneywise is a podcast all about not how to make money in startups, but how to manage life and what changes in life and the emotional impacts and of wealth once you've built some success.
Yeah.
So we interview billionaires and millionaires, all about kind of like what their various aspects of their life after the exit, basically. So definitely go and check that out on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever. Yeah, and then I hang out on LinkedIn, so you can find me, Harry Morton, on LinkedIn. My company's called Lower Street. We produce podcasts like Moneywise for a bunch of different companies, and yeah, that's us.
Nice, pretty cool. Something I wanted to get kicked off on is interviewing all these high net worth people. What's one realization you had just talking to these people that seems sort of unknown or like mystified from someone who doesn't know these people very personally?
I think the key one that stands out to me is that a lot of us founders, I think that there's this sort of end game in mind, which is the exit, or maybe it's cash flow for you. It might not be like selling your business. It might be just like cash flowing. It might be, trying to do the Andrew Wilkinson thing and doing a whole portfolio of businesses and hiring a bunch of CEOs. What I found after speaking to like a bunch of these people is that actually it's not all it's cracked up to be. And actually a lot of folks get to that point and then they find actually a great deal of emptiness on the other side. They're like, okay, now what? Now I've got like a bunch of money and a bunch of free time. What's the purpose of life at this point? And so they might go through like a period of 6 or 12 or 24 months of just like partying or traveling or indulging in all the hobbies they didn't have time for, buying cars, I don't know, partying and doing drugs. There's like a ton of different ways to kind of spend that success. And it seems almost universal. Universal is probably an unfair description, but very, very common indeed, that after that kind of 6, 12, 24 month period, however long that is for the individual, there's this sort of like feeling of lostness, and like my identity was tied to this thing. I've made a huge success of it. I've poured everything into it, and now like I don't really know what my identity is beyond that. And so I think the big lesson I'm taking away is, whatever my end game is, whether it's selling my business or continuing to build it and just have this wonderful asset which I'm enjoying. I want to have like I want to basically just like know that isn't it. Like there's more to life than just those things, and kind of giving myself permission to go experiment a bit and focus on giving myself financial security, setting things up. So all this money I've made, great, but like how am I making sure that like everything is in order so that this isn't going to go away? And then how do I just like give myself some downtime? Because I think the other big mistake that a lot of people make is like, okay, I've finished this thing. I've got a million ideas I want to go explore right away. And they jump into the next thing. I heard this stat the other day that it's actually on an upcoming episode, that 70% of second businesses fail. And that's because
interesting.
So founders will just immediately jump to the next thing because they can't handle that emptiness, that like, I don't know what to do with my time. They don't kind of give themselves the time to figure out what's next. And so they just launch straight into the next thing. And, there's a decent amount of hubris that comes with that, right? Because we're like, well, I've done this before, I can do it. But oftentimes actually that's not always the case. And a lot of people, have real struggles there, and they kind of throw a bunch of good money after bad, trying to like save this thing. So yeah, my plan is to give myself a break, allow myself to like understand like it's gonna feel weird, like I'm gonna be a bit lost for a while, and that's okay, and just to like let that happen and kind of go about the next stage of life with a bit of purpose rather than floundering or
100%.
feeling like I've already got it figured out because you haven't got it figured out.
100%. And I think that's part of some of the reason why I also started this podcast is a lot of people jump into entrepreneurship thinking about this outcome in mind, and they only hear 1 in 10 outcomes. They only
Hmm.
hear the ones that sound good and are good to write about and people are happy to post. They don't hear about the
Right.
nine that failed. And even in the ones that they do hear about, they don't know the full intricacies. I know people who've sold for 8 figures, but they make less than a million and they've been grinding for 8 years. And is that worth it? Like, is it worth it to
Hmm.
make so little? And also, founders tend to do this thing where while they're building, they're like, oh, I'm gonna like, have a below market salary. I'm only gonna make 60K a year, 100K a year, like bare bones because you don't want to hurt the company. And
Hmm.
at the end of it, you're like, well, I did this for 10 years and I have no significant amount of money to show for it. And I feel like that's not highlighted enough. People don't talk about that enough about all the mistakes that happen. You sign a bad term sheet, you do this, but you just hear the 100 million and 28-year-old and you're like, I want to be that person, right? So to your point,
Yep.
there's so much more to this journey. And if you don't like do it in a fun way that can be fulfilling, it becomes a grind, it becomes a slog, it becomes a job, and that's not why you even started in the first place.
Yeah, and I think just being, I think not even being honest, but like, I think no one realizes or acknowledges the extent that the emotional side of things is driving them. Like for me, I've got a big chip on my shoulder, right, and I'm like working hard to prove something to myself, to a bunch of other people that I like, that I can do this, right, and that's to an extent that's a good thing. It's like a fire in the belly. It makes you work hard. It kind of has got me to where I am today, you could argue. Like, I sometimes say it's like kind of nice to almost invent enemies sometimes, because like if you've got someone to like beat, it gives you that energy to get up and get at it and kind of grow and kind of build the business, which is
100%.
great. But also that means there's a lot of things driving you to do what you're doing. The narrative though is like, but I'll be happy when I can just kind of like lay on the beach and drink pina coladas all day. I don't even like pina coladas. I don't know why I said
Yeah.
that, but you know what I mean? Like if that's your thing, like I just want to go play golf all day, or I want to sit on the beach all day or whatever. Actually, that you're fooling yourself. Like that's not actually what you want. And when you get there, you'll realize it. And then a lot of folks get there, they realize it, and then they're like, "Oh shit! Like now, what the hell do I do with my life?" And in a really kind
100%.
of profound way. And I think you just need to be like just real with that, and not think you've got it figured out, because otherwise it's going to bite you in the ass.
100%. I know someone who was at Hampton and he's doing his own newsletter now. And I talked to him and I'm like, why go from like a job that pays well to like trying to build this media company? And he said that in interviewing a lot of Hampton founders, he understood that, okay, even after you've made it, doesn't matter how much you've made, you're roughly spending 20-30K a month on lifestyle and living that life that you want to live, and he sees a way for him to do that via his media company that is a lot more chill paced. He can actually live his life. Takes him a couple days a week. He's not on the grind building this company for 80 hours a week. And he sees a path to get to the same outcome where he can live the same kind of life that he's been wanting to, that like all these people on like successful people on Hampton do.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's very powerful of understanding what are you working towards before you just dive heads deep into I want to build $1 billion company. Like half the people don't even know what it takes. Like the amount of scaling and processes and systems to go from hey, I have an idea that makes me a couple 100K a year to like I want to build $1 billion business are two very far extremes. But this isn't glorified as much and like all the outcomes are glorified about building the big company. So I feel like to your point, it's super powerful to understand why are you in it? What do you want? How do you optimize for every factor and not just the I want to build and make a lot of money, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like
For sure.
that's super powerful. Switching gears a little bit to sort of your journey. You started Lower Street Media roughly 2017. So what's your background? How did you get into podcasts so early? And like what was those first couple of days like of, oh hey, I'm gonna go start a podcasting company? Because my understanding is 2016, 17 is like podcasts are there, like there's a lot of people doing them, but it's not the same level of like, oh, everybody has a podcast like today. So how did you even get into the space under that space? What were you doing
Yeah,
before?
it didn't feel early at the time. Honestly, there was a lot of momentum already, and I felt like I was late at the time. And I think to some extent I was. I don't know, like back then Tim Ferriss was still big, Joe Rogan was
Yeah,
already a huge thing. Serial had come out, if you're familiar with Serial, which was like a
yeah,
big like moment in podcasting. So I think it had really hit the kind of like, mainstream to a certain extent by this point. But yeah, it hadn't reached the sort of COVID level of adoption, and
yeah,
this trope of everyone has a podcast, which by the way they don't. There's like a million, many times more YouTube channels than there are podcasts. There's a ton of
yeah,
opportunity still in podcasting, and people kind of sleep on that, I think. Um, but yeah, so my background is in I went to university to study sound engineering, and I did that. I worked in studios in London for a little while, on sort of working in this studio that did stuff for TV commercials and things like that. Then I left that and actually ended up working in sales and marketing for a few years, traveled a bunch, and got a ton of experience really in sort of corporate sales. And during that whole kind of sales experience, I knew, well, to be honest, I've known for since I was a kid that I wanted to have my own business. Like that was just always
yeah.
a goal of mine to do, but wasn't sure exactly what it was. So that sales experience is what led me to. I spent really that whole 6 year period that I was in sales, listening to podcasts to educate myself. Like, what is this business going to be? I was listening to Tim Ferriss. I was listening to like Pat Flynn and like all these different guys back then of like, how can I start an online business? And it was during that period that I realized the sort of penny sort of slowly dropped that like, hey, podcasting is probably it. Like this is where I'm educating myself. I've got something to add here. I've got an audio background. I get it. And I know how to sell to corporates. And so I figured there was in the same way that every brand needs a website, and then every brand needed a Twitter account or a LinkedIn
Yeah.
account. I figured the next wave was podcasting. Every brand needs a podcast. And so we set that up I say we, it was very much just me in 2016, 17. And then it was kind of a pretty slow, it's been, fully self-funded and bootstrapped since the beginning. So it was kind of a slow build up. And then once we hit sort of 2020, 21 with the COVID pandemic and everyone going crazy for podcasting, it really sort of took off some. And yeah, it's been a quick growth since then. But
Nice.
yeah,
So, talking about those first couple of days, right? Like you started the company, how long to like, oh, I have this an idea, I know I can figure this out, to landing your first actual client? Like, what was that time frame? Because, and what I'm trying to make an analogy for is for anyone starting a company, right? Everything seems so easy, but like one discipline, right? Like you understood sales, you knew podcasting, but there's so much more that goes into setting up the business, knowing how to send a proposal, knowing how corporates work. There's timelines to getting stuff delivered. You got to invoice, you got to PO. Like when you're working with slightly bigger, more process oriented companies, there's so much more that you're sort of just learning on the job. But what was that journey from I'm starting to first like money in bank?
I can't remember honestly how long it was, but yeah, I mean I got the first deals from cold email. So I quit my sales job. I mean I was about to get fired to be honest, but I quit before they could fire me, and uh, and then I went and so to start this thing, but I couldn't like I was it was not going to make any money, and it didn't make any money for months. So I went back to what I was doing as a kid, which was waiting tables. So I went back
Yeah,
and worked at.
nice,
I used to work at these private events, and I'd wait tables at Buckingham Palace, and
nice,
like all these fancy places around London, which was fun. So I'd do that at night, and in a day I'd just be hacking away on my laptop trying to
nice.
do stuff. And the way in was cold email. So back then that was still working pretty well. So I just I was listening to a bunch of podcasts and getting tactics off these growth hacky people. And I was like, oh, do you know what? I can scrape every RSS feed of all these podcasts and get the email address off them and email the people and say, hey, your podcast stinks. I can make it better
Yeah,
in better language than that. And and pitch my services, and that's what kind of got us off the ground. That was like our first handful of clients, and then from there it just sort of
nice.
started to build. And those first clients were great. I'm forever grateful to them, but they didn't represent really where we've ended up heading. I think I realized very quickly that the better clients were certainly the enterprise level folks, and so we've just we slowly went up market. And yeah, and again, 2019-20 is when I really took a full blown focus on the enterprise level.
Nice.
And that's kind of where we've stuck and what's worked for us. But yeah, those first couple of years was like the first. I want to say it was. I can't remember if it was 6 months or a year, but I was still waiting tables for a good period of time until like the revenue was up to a level that I could sort of sustain a living. And luckily, my wife was kind of propping me up at that point as well.
Nice. That's pretty cool. What's the shift to go from smaller companies to enterprise look like? So, from a service delivery point of view, does anything change from you operating this agency that you have to cater to an enterprise differently than an SMB?
No, frankly, like people are people. They just you know there's they've got like bigger legal teams and compliance and kind of all this stuff to navigate, but like it's not, ultimately you're just dealing with a team of marketers, and whether it's like one marketer who's like a very one person company, or whether it's like a team of
A
10
team of
marketers inside a
marketers.
massive company. Ultimately the process is very much the same. They just want like, they want strategy, what should our podcast sound like, they want production, how do we get it recorded, they want editing, how do we make the finished thing look good, and then how do we distribute it, get it out there, grow our audience. And so really the pivot, or not even a pivot, but the sort of development over time towards the enterprise was really just a positioning thing, and a messaging
Nice.
thing, and a sales and marketing thing, right? Like that was really all that changed.
Nice. Pretty cool. And you guys do end to end with enterprises where you design the concept, do the recording, produce X number of shows every week. You guys also do growth as well on top.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And so, one question for when you're working with enterprises, are you building the enterprise's brand, or is there always some archetype within the company who is the face of the brand that you're building on top of? Because one thing that's a little different than YouTube, in my understanding, is with podcasts, you need a person and a face. So, how are you building and positioning that media property for these enterprises?
So, I mean, I guess with any podcast, the host is the face of the brand. Like, so that for sure is like a thing. So, getting that right, whether you're a giant Fortune 500 or whether you're a smaller team, again, like the face of the podcast is the face of the podcast. So, that's always relevant. But for the big brands, it's really about the brand, not necessarily so much the person. They might want to align themselves with like, uh, a more famous influencer or talent, that might not even be from within the company. In other cases, it might be the CEO or the CMO or whatever. Yeah, but typically when you get working with the larger brands, they're interested in how do we position the brand itself rather than center it
Makes sense.
around a particular person. That being said, every podcast, the relationship with the host is important. So kind of getting that person right is important. Yeah.
Nice. I like that. I was talking to someone who works with Patty in Austin, the YouTube strategist guy, and I
Uh
started
huh.
noticing that he's starting to work with a lot of brands like Red Bull. And I was on YouTube the other day and I saw a Liverpool vlog come out of them winning the Champions Trophy. And I feel like there's been a shift in the YouTube space of like, hey, this is a landing page for us. How do we build this landing page to build our brand? And similarly, I haven't seen this as much in podcasts, or maybe it's just not hitting my feed. But are enterprises more prone to building out media companies now and like not media properties for top of funnel? And is the intention there brand building? Is the intention top of funnel to get customers? Is the intention just put our name out there more? So like with what intention are enterprises building these podcast properties now?
Yeah. So I mean, so yes, we are seeing a trend of brand. It's been coming for like 7, 8 years now, but it's just like a slow
Yeah.
burn. But for sure, more and more brands are leaning into the network play, the network approach of having a ton of different podcasts that serve different stages of the funnel, different market
Yeah.
niches, different verticals, all that kind of stuff. So that's definitely a trend, and I think that like for the most part, like if a brand has one podcast, if it's a big enterprise company, they're interested in brand. They're not trying to sell more widgets with their podcast, because like that's not what podcasting is good for. If you want that, you just go and buy a PPC campaign. But like, um, but podcasting, where it really excels, is kind of building meaningful, lasting relationships over
Yeah,
time with people that like really buy into the vision of what you're doing. And so it's all about brand. But that, and so then that being said, that's your kind of like keystone piece of content or whatever. The network approach then allows you to kind of go deeper into different layers of the funnel. And so there might be stuff that's much more kind of tailored towards specific solutions, or like, yeah, different state, without getting into
yeah,
like some
yeah.
really specific example, like just, different stages of the funnel. So one could be more sales focused, one could be more brand
Makes
focused.
sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense. I also think I was pitching a brand to sponsor my podcast, and my pitch to them was, instead of me doing an ad read, why can I not interview your customers and talk about your product? That's my like segment on the channel. You can use that content, and then on top of that, let's interview your customers, get them some clout, get them some visibility, because if they grow with you and they use your product more. And that's also brownie points for you as a company, where you're doing something on top for the customer that you don't really need to. And so I think, to your point, there's a lot of like, that retention part of the curve that can be done with podcasts, where you really make someone feel like your service and or SaaS or product is just, you know, really good to work with as a brand, just because you do everything and you do all these things on top that help them build a better and bigger company.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, look, no one wants to listen to an infomercial, right? So like a podcast shouldn't be like about your product or service, frankly, because it's just like that just makes a shit podcast. Because like,
Yeah,
why would you subscribe to that? If we're talking about like an ad, like you're describing as a sponsor ad, great. Talk about the product, because that's what ads are for. People get it. Like, I'm
yeah,
being sold to you right now. I'm cool with that. That's the cost of content, whatever. um but I think you have to be like really specific about the trying to, so if this is an owned piece of content, you have to be really specific about the problem that that's solving for the customer, such that it feels valuable to them enough that they're actually going to listen. Otherwise, why would I
100%.
just listen to a 30-minute advert?
Yeah,
um but again, like, if you've got that network effect and you've kind of got your big sort of flagship podcast, you've got these sort of pieces that go further and further down the funnel, you kind of buy the right to be a bit more direct and be just like, cool, like,
100%.
here's how you can use this specific tool in this specific way. And they know that like 0.001% or whatever their audience is going to actually bother listening to that thing, but the ones that do are really going to be the most successful customers, or convert, or whatever that thing is that you might be trying to get out of it.
100%.
um
100%.
yeah.
I had a podcast ad person in Austin on, and one thing he was talking about was, when you think about podcasting and like audience and who you're catering to, if someone's a podcast consumer, maybe you listen to 1 to 4 episodes a week, right? Like somewhere in that range of like how much you're consuming. They've probably been listening to these shows for 2, 3 years, depending on how long the shows have been around. So they've developed some loyalty with the person, the brand, the podcast. And like I can say, for my first million, I've listened to a lot of episodes, but there's some where I'm just like, I'm not vibing with this episode today. But more often than not, I would listen to almost all the weekly ones. And
Hmm.
I was thinking about this for my podcast of like, growth is a slow curve, because I'm asking someone to remove a podcast that they listen to every week and listen to my full hour. And that's probably not going to happen for a while until I build up that trust over time, either
Right.
through shorts or newsletters or other top of funnel. But that was a very stark realization for me, that if you are building a podcast, it's going to be really hard to get someone to completely switch over. You gotta sort of like provide those nuggets over time, hoping that eventually you will become one of their weekly or bi-weekly episodes, right? And so that was a very stark realization of just how like growth happens in this space, because people aren't listening to 10 hours of podcasts a week. It just is. I
No.
don't think
So
it's
I mean,
happening, but yeah.
my take on this is that, yeah, sure, consistency and like delivering on a consistent basis. Like, podcasting is not a fast viral medium. You're not going to grow an
100%. Yeah.
audience quickly. It's going to take time. But honestly, like, like I said, it's not true that everyone has a podcast, but there are a lot more podcasts than there were 5 years ago. And so there's not
Yes.
much there's no shortage of choice as a consumer. So we're talking now on a tech startup business podcast. There is a metric shit ton of shows
Yeah.
in that vein, right? And so you've got two choices. One is well, you got a few choices, I guess. One choice is like, I don't even care if this show doesn't get big. This is a vehicle for me to meet interesting people and expand my
Yes.
network and have some legitimate content I can put up on social. Great, tick that box. Even if 20 people listen, I kind of don't care because like it's all about like positioning and networking and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Then you've got the other play of like, okay, I'm just going to make this thing religiously every week for 472 episodes, knowing that everyone else is going to quit before I do, and so therefore I will eventually build that audience and it'll get there over time. For me, the thing that we should be doing instead is thinking about what's like, why should you listen to mine? So you've got 6 hours of podcast listening time per week, let's say, I don't know, whatever the average is for,
Yeah.
for people
Yeah.
in this kind of startup ecosystem. How do I earn the right to get in the 6 hours of weekly listening for the audience that I care about? And the way that we do that is by making something unique and that's distinct and that's really high quality, well thought about, well planned, well executed, and differentiated. So for Moneywise, the podcast that I host, for example, that podcast is where ultra high net worth people come on the show and literally tell us like what's their net worth, where do they
Yeah.
invest, how did they get, like, people don't share that money, that stuff publicly. It's just not a thing. Like, people are very
100%.
guarded about their finances, so it's information you don't get anywhere else. It's a really different show, right? So it's providing something new and unique, and I think that's what like most people need to think about when they're starting a podcast. Is like, what if I'm being really honest with myself, would I listen to this idea for a show I've got if it wasn't me that made it? And I think it's really hard to ask yourself that question and be objective. But the
100%.
truth 9 times out of 10 is like, no, I probably wouldn't. I'd probably still listen to My First Million and Tim Ferriss. So like, you got to think of like, what is it that's going to make you unique and stand out, and try to make that.
100%. And I completely agree with that. And I think to add to that, like understanding where's the niche within the niche of like for money wise, I don't think I've heard any podcast that says openly, hey, I made 100 million, I'm putting this here, I'm putting that there. Just because I feel like people are afraid of putting that information out there. But if you're
Yeah.
able to find something there that works, I think it's like even for my podcast, there's been episodes where I know I can probe someone to like really go deep into like, hey, what is the struggle with you building this company? I just haven't gotten there yet comfortably of like, do I want to make this person a little uncomfortable on the show? Even though they know me off camera, they've told me everything off camera, but some people are afraid to put it out there because it makes it real. And so I've been
Yep.
trying to figure out what's the right approach to like telling that story that doesn't make this person feel alienated, but still gets the point across of like, hey, here's what a real journey looks like, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'll figure it out over time. But still, like to your point, I know that that's one thing that I don't do well enough because I'm afraid of alienating the guest. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
I should, maybe I shouldn't be, but just
Yeah. But I'd even ask the question: is that in itself unique still? Like, is that something you can't get anywhere else? And like, maybe it is, but also maybe not. I don't know. Like, like increasing your skills as an interviewer is definitely going to make the show better.
yeah, yeah,
Reaching that comfort point or building the trust, the rapport with the guests, such that you can get information that they might not share
yeah,
elsewhere. That is a differentiator to some degree. But I would also be thinking about like, what's the information I want to get? Like, what's the podcast that I really want to exist that doesn't exist right now, and how can I make that in a way that is different from what else is out there? Um, and how do I communicate that to the world so they can understand like this is actually worth the time? Do you know what I mean? Because like, if what you're saying is like, this is a startup podcast and I ask really like questions that probe and get people uncomfortable, like, me, as like I'm scrolling through Spotify, I see your podcast, like I don't know that about your show. That's not
yeah.
immediately apparent. So like, you got to think of like how you address that. But like I said, like the answer could just be like, hey, whatever, like this is a networking thing, and
Yeah.
if it grows slowly rather than fast, like I kind of, that doesn't matter to me. So anyway, yeah, that's how I think
I
about it.
100% agree. Yeah, 100% agree. One thing I wanted to get your take on is for founders who are in the SaaS startup space who have raised some money, are trying to build a brand, build a media property. What's your recommendation on how should they approach building a podcast, right? So we talked a little bit about, finding what you want to hear, what you want to talk about, what you would listen to, sort of finding that angle of like, what are you trying to do? Is it more top of funnel? Are you selling exactly a product? But can we hypothetically talk through, hey, I'm a founder of a SaaS company. How do I think about building a podcast brand? Um, and should I do it or not? Like, if we could just talk through some of those strategies,
Yeah.
tactics, or advice.
So like I said just a minute ago, if what you care about is like networking and getting intros to people, having an excuse to spend an hour talking to someone that otherwise you would just be like
100%.
sending them a pitch deck, like it's a wonderful tool. So like that could be the answer for like a whole bunch of people. Like I don't give a crap if like 10 people listen or 100 or 1,000
Yeah.
people. It doesn't matter. I've sat in a room with this person and that's the win. So that might be the answer for many people. Um, but if what we care about is building an audience, then really the goal is to figure out who is the audience that we're trying to serve. What else are they already listening to? So what are the shows that this audience, like that this crowd of people are already connected with and care about? And what can I do that is different and additive to that, so that I can carve out a piece of that audience for myself. It really has to be audience first. I think a lot of people start the podcasting thing with like, I want to do a podcast. Podcasting's hot right now. I'm going to do an interview show like Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan or Theo Von or whoever. Like, I'm just going to get someone interesting. We're going to have a conversation for an hour, just like Diary of the CEO, and great, it'll be a hit. And like these are I've got a really great network, so these are the people I could interview, and like I'm a really great interviewer, so this is going to be cool. None of what I've just described is differentiated in any way. So it's like
Yeah.
it's just massive uphill. That's like saying I'm going to do Mr. Beast videos, but I've got a budget of $10 per
Yeah.
video. Like you're
100%.
just not going to win that game. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's about really understanding who the audience is and what you can uniquely provide them. And you can only know what you can uniquely provide them by knowing who they are and what they care about and what they're into. If you think about what you want to make and then put that out into the world and hope that an audience comes, you're going to have a harder time. So the first step for sure is just like defining the audience and figuring out what they need. Um, and then it is thinking about like, what can you provide that's unique? How can you stand apart and be different? So for Moneywise, it's we're getting rich people to reveal stuff that they don't reveal anywhere else. We're getting access to people to wealthy people that otherwise wouldn't necessarily come on and talk about this kind of stuff. And also we're doing it in a format that's different. So we use sort of storytelling, narrative
Yeah.
style kind of stuff. So it's like How I Built This, if you've ever listened to that, or kind of an NPR show. So it's got like a different layer of kind of polish on the production of
Yes.
it, which kind of makes it a kind of different offer. So rather than episodes being like an hour long, they're like 30, 40 minutes long, and there's storytelling and all that kind of stuff. So that's how we thought about differentiation. And obviously that's not going to be the case for everybody, but like, I think like opportunities that are slept on are things like, what is the daily news podcast for my industry? Like that probably doesn't exist yet, and I should make that. What is like, I don't know, stupid ideas like, what is the quiz show format for my industry? Like
Yeah.
that would be fun. People would be entertained by that, and would stand out. Like, whatever. Like think creatively, because what there isn't a shortage of is like two fucking white dudes from tech around a table talking about tech. Like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
box has been
Yeah.
checked. So don't stress about that. Let's think about what else the world needs maybe, and try and make that. So that's what I would think about. I think for founders, it's really hard to do that reliably because it's very time consuming. So I think people think like, hey, I can just like jump on a Zoom call and spend half an hour a week talking to people. But the reality is, you're like I've just described, you're not going to have anything that's differentiated or worth listening to.
Yeah.
So to actually invest the time to make it good is really time consuming. So you've either got to work with someone like me, hey, or you've just got to realize like this is going to grow really slowly or be very small, and so I've got to be strategic about how I use it. Or like maybe podcasting is not for me, or maybe I need to get external talent to host this podcast. It's not about my personal brand. um that's my perspective, because I see a lot of content, I see a lot of podcasts, and I
100%.
think
Yeah.
it's just a lot of like below average stuff. But like a lot of the counter argument to that is like, hey, if I sit down on a Riverside conversation, so we're on a platform called Riverside right now. It's not a Zoom call, it's like a higher quality recording platform, so we get good quality footage. If I'm interviewing interesting people, I've got content then that I can chop up and I can put on social media, I can turn that into a blog post, I can use it on all these different channels and TikTok and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. There's some validity to that, like being omnipresent is kind of a thing. I guess my perspective is I would rather like matter. I would rather like do
100%.
less,
Yeah.
and I would do less and do it better rather than be everywhere with mediocrity. And I think in the face of AI, when we've got just like an just like overwhelming amount of content that's already started and it's only going to get more and more extreme, the only way that you can compete with that is by being unique, differentiated, good, you know. And so I'm here to fight the fight for really good content. Like, don't get me wrong, I want everyone to podcast, and you should make a podcast. And if it's like not the greatest thing the world has ever known, fine. This can still have some value. But I think if we really want to, like, if you want to be the next Joe Rogan, you've got to make something really, really exceptional.
100%. Yeah.
So that's my take.
Well, while you were saying that, I was just thinking about which of my episodes have popped off more than others. And
Mm-hmm.
I think all the ones where I have someone on that walks a founder through, like, I had an ads guy on. I was like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
just break down paid media for me. I don't understand
Sure.
paid media. Give me the 80/20 of what channel I should start with. Let's assume I'm a B2B SaaS founder. How much money should I spend? How should I just understand? Because when you go to an ads person, they're like, oh yeah, 2K retainer, spend 10K a month. I don't want to spend 15K to understand whether I like ads or not, or whether it even
Mm-hmm.
worked. Another episode that popped off was I had a coach on, and I was like, not everyone can afford 5 grand a month to work with you. Let's break down in this next hour how a founder should approach just their life and like their strategy and how they position themselves and what you help with. Like, how, let's break that down. And we just broke it down like, hey, here's what I would do first. Like, break it out into quarters, do this kind of goal, that kind of goal setting. So every
Mm-hmm.
episode where I've had someone on who's an expert in a field talk through, hey, like, what's the 80/20 of like what you're subject matter expert on, and how can a founder sort of incrementally get better in this thing that you're teaching. And I feel like
Yep.
those episodes have done a lot better than just
For
like,
sure.
oh yeah, it's
Everyone,
hard. Yeah, yeah.
people love how to content, like, you know, really strategic really tactical stuff. People love like tools content, like what are the best tools for this and that, and like being, you know, those kind of pieces of content work really well. Again, like, it's hard to differentiate that, but like if you're able to make that on a consistent basis really valuable stuff like that, and then have a distribution channel to get it in front of the people that you care about listening, that you know, that could be it. And that's the other sort of leg to the stool, I suppose, is like,
Yeah,
you know, content quality and differentiation, but then also distribution. And so if you have like a means of getting this out to the right people, that can also win.
100%. What's your take on topical podcasts versus more evergreen in terms of being in the moment about something's hot right now versus, you know, like the coaching thing or like paid ads, like that's probably going to be true for a while and still can be listened to later. Any opinion
Yeah.
on doing one versus the other kind of content?
No, I think there's a case for both. It really depends again on the kind of show you want to try and make. So I think that, like, you know, we see long tail downloads of old episodes all the time on all of the podcasts we produce. It's like super common that people go back through the back catalog, or they're searching for a particular topic and a show comes up and they listen. So evergreen content is totally relevant if that's the kind of show you're making. If you're making a topical current events, current affairs kind of show, or trends show, then that's equally as valid. So yeah, there's two different approaches entirely.
Makes
I
sense.
wouldn't. It's harder to combine both, to be honest, because as an audience, you're like, well, what am I signing up for? Am I signing up for like the latest stuff on this show, or am I signing up for just like thought leadership,
Yeah,
for want of a better phrase?
makes sense. And wanted to get your opinion on what do you think is missing in the podcasting space right now? Not from a show idea, but from a tech and tools and perspectives on like how podcasters can support and build their brand out. Do you think there's anything missing that can be done better?
There's a lot that can be done better. You know, people talk all the time, particularly in the marketing world, about, you know, analytics, measurement, attribution, all this sort of stuff is like definitely behind in podcasting, and
Yeah,
that's kind of a limitation of the distribution method, right? It's
100%.
RSS, and
Yeah,
so that means RSS distribution means that there's like, it's private, like it's by design private, so you don't know who's listening, and that's a wonderful thing about podcasting. It means it's open, it's free, that's awesome, but it also means that it brings a ton of challenges. So when you're used to like doing your ad campaigns and knowing precisely like exactly who's clicked on what, and you're able to track a ton of different stuff, it's really hard to take that digital marketing mindset and then look at podcasting and go, well, this is dog shit. Like I have no idea what's going on. It's just it's just a black hole. So
Yeah.
there's a ton of stuff to be made there. But the thing is, without fundamentally changing how podcasts are distributed, it's kind of like a very, very challenging problem to
Yeah,
solve.
you're gonna be stuck with that, yeah.
Spotify, yeah, Spotify, YouTube, they're trying to sort of bring things into their walled gardens. And if one of those guys wins, then I guess, if podcasting is just YouTube that now, then great, we've got the same amount of data that we had in YouTube. I, for one, would rather see the open ecosystem of podcasting and
100%,
via
yeah.
RSS, sustain, because I think it's one of the things that makes it wonderful. But yeah, there's a ton of problems to be solved in the kind of measurement data side of the podcasting business.
Do you have an opinion on audio versus video, or you would prefer the whole ecosystem?
I get it's like a case by case basis. So I think a lot of like all the chat in podcasting right now is like, oh my god, YouTube, oh my god, video. We've got it. You have to have a video strategy. And I think for the most part, yes, everyone should have some form of video strategy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we should suddenly turn on the cameras and just make a video version of our podcast. Because, like, for example, with Moneywise, that's been really challenging because we're doing like storytelling and narrative. That's really hard. If you're like NPR and you're making like or Serial, like I said before, and you're making these like really deep documentary style shows, like you can't just like put that on YouTube. It just doesn't work. So
Yeah.
and also for a lot of like, so we work in the branded space, a lot of our clients, like their audience isn't on YouTube, or it's not, that's not where they need to be reached right now. If you're trying to reach like Fortune 500 CEOs, they're probably not spending that much time like scrolling through YouTube. They like to listen to stuff while they're on the treadmill or commuting or whatever. So my point of view on this is that like video is awesome. It's a great opportunity. It's a great, like, discovery is another area, to your point around, what are the opportunities in podcasting from a tech perspective. A lot of people talk about discovery as a thing inside of podcasting. Video is a great solution to that. YouTube is the best discovery platform out there. But that doesn't mean that you should that everyone should have a video version of their podcast. It's not that obvious. I think you should really lean into like who your audience is, how they consume, and what would serve them best. And maybe that's video, but also maybe it's just continuing with just audio. But I'm excited by the opportunity that video is providing us. It's bringing
Yeah, 100%.
a lot of change to the space. That's
I
cool.
think I think one thing that video does is it gets you a really good top of funnel if you know how to like slice up your content and like, do the
Mm-hmm.
distribution. But I think the other thing is that the audience you want to see? Because when you cut up a show, like I've seen so many shorts that felt like a bait and switch to me. Because like I'll listen to the short, like, oh yeah, this sounds really good, but when you go to the episode, it's like something completely different. It's not what the
Mm-hmm.
short made it seem. So again, really
Sure.
good top of funnel, but maybe not the best for long form retained users. And to your
Yeah.
point, like what are you trying to build for? So you optimize for that channel. But yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Sweet. I know we're at time. I wanted to make sure I'm able to plug you again. I don't know if you have a hard stop or not, but
I do,
um
unfortunately. Yeah.
I yeah, you're good. I appreciate the time. I think this was a great episode just chatting about podcast strategy, and then at some point I'd love to just dive deeper into I have a couple founders who are starting podcasts, so maybe there's a scope to like sit with them and break their strategy down, like, hey, what's good, what's bad, what would you recommend they fix, and so we'll find time to figure that out. But wanted to
Sure.
thank you for your time.
No, thanks for having me. This has been
And
fun.
yeah, and then why don't you just plug yourself once again? What should we link for you in the description? And we'll put
Yeah.
everything.
So number one thing to check out is Moneywise. Search Moneywise wherever you get your podcasts. If you're interested in kind of high net worth people, founders talking about their money and how their lives have changed, and how to plan for yours. And personally, find me on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out the most. I talk about podcasting all the time.
Nice.
So yeah, those two I say.
Pretty cool. And we'll link everything for you and I'll keep you posted. But yeah, I appreciate the time, man.